koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai, welcome to Waikato Museum. I'm Liz Cotton, I'm the director of the museum, and really I'm here just to welcome you all to the National Contemporary Art Award exhibition. We had a wonderful awards evening last night, and it's lovely to see so many of our finalists and winners here today. You're very welcome. And welcome to everyone else who's joined us this very beautiful morning. We had 427 entries for the competition this year, which is the most we've ever had. Last year we had just over 300 as a comparison, so it's been an amazing ride doing the selection, and Melanie, our judge, Melanie Oliver, has done a wonderful job of selecting 41 finalists who are represented here with their amazing work. So I'm going to hand over to Melanie, our judge for the 2023 awards, and I hope you enjoy this talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. I think I have to use this too. Atamarie. Thank you all for coming along to hear a few words about some of the works in the show. I'll talk a bit about those who were awarded awards, but maybe just a few more general things as well, since it's such a great sort of range and array of exciting contemporary practice at the moment, I think. So it was a very difficult task to choose our awards, and there were plenty of others that I also really enjoyed or found challenging or thought were interesting. So please do, I'm very happy to keep it quite informal, and do sing out if you have a question along the way. And we'll start on this side, talk about a few of the works over here, head over to the other side and look at our winner, Tawhai's work. And yeah, so thank you all for joining me today. It was challenging to go through online all of these entries and choose things, and as I was going through, I was really thinking about what was important for today, what was really relevant, what I sort of thought was capturing the moment, the contemporary moment. And one of the things that came through really strongly was an interest in the environment, an interest in climate change, which is, you know, the major challenge for us all, the inequalities that stem from that as well, but also more generally our relationship to the environment. And some of the artists in the exhibition are also thinking about the sort of human, non-human, and how is our impact on the earth the only thing we can look at, or is there more agency to the environment? How that may continue after our potential demise. Just I'm quite doomsday there, but yeah, so I was really thrilled that artists are looking at that. I think it is really important for us to think about climate emergency and how we can respond to that, and I think we're seeing that all around the country with flooding, with extreme weather, and how that's impacting communities already. Here, through the Pacific, it's really challenging, and it's not always those who've caused it that are having the impacts. Anyhow, so that's a cheerful note to start on for you all. But I just wanted to think about that we have a beautiful series just on the wall behind us here of these drawings that sort of look at the ocean. Now I have this here with me because it was blind judging. I don't necessarily know all the artists' names off the top of my head. So, but I did want to point out how beautiful those drawings were. And let me quickly, here we go. I did have it on the right page, Maria O'Toole. I thought they were just lovely. So I thought I would just point to those. In the small back room, there's a lovely work by Amanda Watson, who I think is a local artist, having a show at a Ramp Gallery soon, where she allowed the canvas to be affected by the environment as she was making it, put it out into the landscape, and let nature have a chance to impact on the canvas itself before she painted with it, and sort of allowing that in. And there's another work in there which similarly allows a bit of chance and environment to come in. So those were a few of the others that sort of looked at things. We also have a beautiful work by Benjamin Work here behind us. Just incredible work and a beautiful example. But one of our awards, I won't dilly-dally around too much more, was from Sara, Hera, Tautuku, Orme, and this photograph here, which is called Darling Tēnei O. and I found this work incredibly moving. It was one that sort of lingered in my mind as I was moving around the space and looking at everything. And I think it just really captures a really strong relationship to the landscape as you sort of see how that sort of merges, comes out into the figure. She's looking towards the sun to sort of have a sense of healing and recuperation, having just recovered from cancer, which is explains a little bit about. But there was something that I really felt when this photograph captured a really strong wairua, and there was something just really beautiful about it that I found really compelling. So that was one of our awardees, and one that I think will linger with you. So it was lovely of me. I hadn't seen this artist's work before, so it was great to be introduced to their practice. Another of our merit awards is just behind you, so you're going to have to swivel around and not look at me for a second, which is Hannah Ireland's work. And this work here, I feel like knowing how it's made is really key to sort of understanding the work itself. So Hannah paints on glass. She's also painted on silk. But with this work, she's painted on the glass many layers, these thin layers of paint that build up, and then she flips it around. So what we're looking at is those first marks, the first things she lays down onto the glass. And you see it ends up being quite gestural, quite free. There's a lot of spontaneity to it. And it means that she, as the artist, doesn't have all the control over the final image, and also it means that at the forefront of the image is the past, is the early marks, is the early thoughts and feelings towards making this portrait. So I think that's really interesting. I love that it sort of hints at the domestic through having this found window that is obviously from a home. So I often think about, where is that from? What lives were lived around it? Who looked through that window on a daily basis? And then I find there's a lot of intrigue. Who is this figure? Are they human, or are they more of a carving? It's just a really intriguing, interesting image that I think similarly compels us to think a little bit more about things. So one of the other themes that I sort of found coming through was an interest in our relationship to digital technology and how we exist in urban spaces, both physical as well as online. And I just wanted to highlight, while we're on this side of the room, a couple of the works that I found really interesting. Sara Thompson here, I spent a lot of time watching this work, and I would recommend spending some time with it. She grew up in Thailand, and when she was homesick, went looking on Google Maps for her home where she grew up, the places she spent time. And I think it's a really interesting translation into a video work of using that aesthetic of how we navigate often, how am I going to get to the supermarket? Got to plug that in. And so how we are sort of navigating the world in a really practical way, but then how that might also feed into our experience of it. And she ends up adding a very personal story to something that is like I wouldn't say necessarily corporate, but a very public, generic system of Google Maps, and then overlaying on that a really personal experience of it. So we hear about her going out with her friends, how she misses calls. She has these little added notes that pop up in there, and I think it's a really interesting work from an artist who's really thinking. So that was one work that I really loved. Another I enjoyed quite a lot. Just next door here is this image of a young boy looking at what we imagine as a screen. And further down the way, I was really thrilled to see mosaics make their way into the exhibition with Bina Jackson's work down the end. So do have a wee look at that. I did ceramics with my grandmother, and so I sort of had a personal oh great. But what Bina is talking about more is public space and how mosaics are used in public space a lot. So I thought that was really interesting, and she's done a very contemporary version of it, skateboarding in public space. So super interesting. And also Reese King here as well, which I feel is a fantastic and exciting work that will spark good conversations if you want to talk to people about it. What is that big brown figure, if we're thinking about emojis? But yeah, really excellent works. Is there anyone else in this bit I wanted to mention? So perhaps I'll just direct our attention now towards our runner-up, who was Hwan Bobby Park. Another of the themes that really came through very strongly from the entrance was an interest in our collective histories. And a while back in art history times, sort of 20 years ago, we saw this historical turn and a use of archives. But the artists here were doing something a bit different. I think it's going back to really histories that are very personal, histories that are still live, histories that need readdressing, and those really urgent histories, which is a funny thing because it's the past, but it's always with us, it's always present, and it is totally impacting how we live today. So a number of artists you'll see are drawing on particular histories, and for this artist who's made this beautiful Ancestor Portrait, it's called BTM Ancestor Portrait, and it's from a series of BTM, called BTM, and really looking at South Korean military practices and culture, and the sort of persecution of LGBTQ plus peoples within that. So that's a reclamation of a queer history, but doing that in a very interesting way, I think. In this portrait, you see a really interesting ceramic helmet of a kind, and then also some embroidery on the front, and they're both by the artist. When you sort of think about South Korean craft heritage, that takes on a whole other level. It's such a key part of South Korean culture, is the history of ceramics for that area is very old, it's very traditional. Actually, they do pay people to keep up traditional crafts. They have a particular creative role, and it's I think quite an interesting thing to keep that tradition alive. They have huge museums dedicated to ceramics and to embroidery and textile crafts. So the use of those within the work is really intentional, and the way they're made is quite different. So once you start looking at it, it's really broken with that anything traditional. We're not seeing a moon jar here. We're not seeing a traditional landscape with the embroidery. We're seeing Hwan's take on that, and sort of a reclamation of those things, and how queer people might have been making things through that time, how other people might have been making in different ways. Also, the use of the portrait is really intentional. There is a long history of the Joseon dynasty of taking and painting and photographing portraiture in a certain way, and this also speaks to that heritage. So trying to go back in and say those traumatic experiences that people had in the military, not being allowed to be free with their sexuality or their identity, that actually they were reclaiming all of that and giving honour to those people through using these heritage crafts and aesthetics and tropes, and reclaiming them and saying, no, I'm going to reinsert into that a queer history for those people and for those today who are also looking for a heritage. I think a lot of younger queer people are looking to the past and trying to identify people, but it's quite invisible, queer histories. They're often under the rug. People might have known that this artist or this cultural figure or this family member was queer, but it's often not actually recorded in our histories. It's not written down because there was, it was illegal for a long time. And so I think it's really important that we have artists today who are reclaiming and making those histories in a way that is really sensitive and thoughtful, and also a really amazing image. So I was really happy to see this work in the prize, and to be able to make space for people to spend with that. Okay, so I think we might now have a shuffle up and move over to the other side. Is everybody all right with that? Thanks everyone, good for us to keep a bit of movement for a Saturday morning. It's a real thrill that we also have the artist of this work here with us, And I suggested last night that maybe they could say a few words if they wanted to too, but we'll just see. So it was really exciting to see Tawhai Rickard's work in person when I came in. It was really impacting, and as you go further through, the detail gives you more and more and more, and you get more depth with the work as you go in. This work is called Scenes from a Victorian Restaurant, which is a play on a Billy Joel song, which I didn't know but had to look up. But it was nice to have that sort of an element of lightness to what is a very serious issue for us continuing. We currently have these anti-co-governance debates that are live throughout the country, and I think this work really offers us a challenge. We have a table and 2 seats that is really about inviting us to enter into a conversation, to a discussion, to come sit at the table and to talk about things that might be a bit uncomfortable. And I think that that's one of the real beauties of contemporary art, is that it can challenge us and provoke us to think about and talk about things that we might not want to, and also to learn. And so here we have a series of vignettes that use public figures, past and present, politicians, artists, activists, historical figures that are really important, and you might not know them all. One I had to look up and found out was Billy T. James' alter ego, which was potentially just before my time. What's his name again? Is Fitzgibbons, Dexter Fitzgibbons. But there's a real joy in being able to spend time with this work and get to think about bicultural foundations, fertility, how we could come back to some sort of sense of honouring that potentially in the future. What I really enjoyed about the work as well is that it's not saying there's right, there's wrong, this is bad. It is saying we need to do better, but it's also saying we need to talk about it and learn, and there's a lot of nuance to it. So that's what I really enjoyed about the work, and why I think it needed to be the winner here, and that I hope it provokes conversations. The painting style itself is really engaging and takes that hard topic of thinking about inequality and racism in Aotearoa and making that not too scary for people, that people can come in and have a look. Painting style is also related to Hine Tāpora, which is the artist's marae, ancestral house. That's what you said. Yeah. So that gives a little bit of background. Tawhai, did you want to add anything? Do you want to? What do you think? Would everyone like that? I think it would be great. Just a few other words if you have anything else you'd like to say, since it's your work.
Thank you, Melanie. E homo e kōrui ki te atua, e mana homo ki te whenua e whakao ki ngā tangata katoa. Mi atu ki a tātou kini Māori, atu reitia, me te kinitanga, I noho i wai. Ngā mātāo katoa, te mātou. Yes, so first of all, thank you very much. And thank you all for being here today. Thank you for choosing this work.
Couldn't not. How could you not?
And all the other finalists. You've done a really good job setting it up. I thought it was, I was a bit nervous how it was all going to come together. And you've done a really great job. So those points, thank you very much. Well, first of all, the style is a collaborative expression of our bicultural foundations, because I lean on our Victorian Baroque elements, and also the figurative painting of my ancestral house, Hene Tāpora, which is Manahani and Marae, in Ruatoria. on the East Coast of North Island here. And combining those two styles was expressive of my cultural foundations. I like to use a lot of narrative in my work. For instance, the layers of narrative in these particular paintings. I kind of like to I was thinking about it last night, and it's kind of sticking into my mind. It's like for painting, for example, I go clockwise, metaphorically, clockwise, and hit a point, and then underneath that, I go anti-clockwise, and there's another layer of information, and I hit a point there, and I go clockwise there. So I'm doing like this with information in my work. If that makes any sense, I don't know. I talk to people, and sometimes you don't get the right crowd. It feels like you're yelling down the barrel. But I hope you understand what I'm saying. So yeah, it's about our social, historical, cultural landscapes, history. I draw on pop art, basically pop art style, Kiwi art pop art style years ago. And, I draw on that pop art style to inform my work today. Particularly British pop art, historical pop art, so anything from Beatty Hill to the Beatles, so on and so forth, in alignment with my cultural foundations. So I use pop art, I use things that are current, things that are historic, and basically merge them together to create my works. I never quite know what I'm going to create next, which is quite cool because it's always fresh to me. And and well, the Billy Joel thing, well, that's pop art. Even though he's American, Italian, and I've seen from an Italian restaurant. I found an interesting juxtaposition with that is at the beginning of the song, it starts to talk about a couple that come together, and then after a while they fell apart, which is kind of in alignment with our bicultural foundations. And then at the end is that abiding invitation to come back to the table again as Māori, non-Māori, to go into those conversations and to find our way forward. So that's it for me.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thank you, Tawhai. An impromptu artist talk is sort of but wonderful to hear, your elaboration. I love this idea of going backwards and forwards in time, physically in the painting of it. So yeah, I'm hoping that will spark conversations between friends and people and just get us back to thinking and talking about things. I will say there's so many other works in the show that I really have enjoyed spending time with, and really just sort of think you will also enjoy. There's a work over here that looks at painting and the VAR space, which I also loved. There's a wonderful portrait in the back room with a woman who just doesn't really want to smile at you walking down the street. So there's a lot to enjoy in this show, but I really was thrilled with the range of practices, and it made me really feel buoyed that contemporary practice in New Zealand has so many great artists making and thinking and wanting to share their work. So yeah, very exciting. Does anyone have any questions that they'd they want to ask, I'm happy to. You will want to get back out to the Saturday afternoon, Saturday sun. Fair enough. Well, if you don't, I would just like to say thank you to Liz and the entire team for inviting me to be a judge here. It was a real honour to get to do that, and I really enjoyed it. It was such a fun and interesting thing to do, and I loved the whole process of just getting to see a lot of work that I might not otherwise have seen. So that was amazing. Thank you, and thanks again to all of the artists who submitted entries. Yeah, but thank you, and I'll linger in case you do have other questions around that you didn't want to ask. Yeah, thank you so much.